and welcome everyone. Let's do some quick intros. So joining us today is Ian Henderson. Ian, over to you. Would you like to give a quick overview?
Sure, thanks, Dom, and thanks very much for inviting me along. So intros. So my name's Ian Henderson. That's a not very recent picture of me, but it's quite a nice one. So use that picture. So as it says there, I used to be the VP of OT Security at BP. I actually worked at BP since 1981 until just a few weeks ago. And my journey in BP might resonate with some of the models we're going to discuss later. My journey in BP started as an apprentice instrument technician. So I used to work on instrumentation in the field. Then became a control engineer, worked in the North Sea for a while, looking after SCADA systems and other industrial control systems. And then a fellow called Paul Dorey joined BP, and he was creating a cybersecurity organization, the first central cybersecurity organization in BP. And Dorey, being an incredibly smart fellow, decided that he needed to focus some of his attention on what we call OT today. We didn't call it OT then. And because Dorey was so smart, he decided he would hire an engineer into his team to learn cybersecurity and then have that engineer go back and talk to other engineers in BP. So guess where this story goes? Dorey hired me. And so for the past 24 years, I was basically employee number one in BP's OT security function. And I went on to lead that function, became a VP, leading a team about 50 or 60 or so just before I left. So that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ian. I think we've got some I've got some real lots of questions about the content that we'll go through, get your insights and opinions on how where things are going and what's important. So yes, and myself, for those who first time coming across me, I'm the Director of Portfolio Marketing for E2E Assure. So I look after what we bring to market, make sure our commercial and portfolio offerings are in line with what are solving the right problems for you and your cybersecurity requirements across enterprise OT and OT, enterprise IT and OT. After we keep, and I've been doing product development, product management, service development for about 20 years, the last 10 years, specifically on pure play cybersecurity. Built lots of MDR propositions and solutions, risk management platforms, and done a bit of security improvements and remediation transformation programs as well. But here, today, we're going to talk about what's happening in the world of cybersecurity for operational technology environments. So quick overview of the agenda. I'm just going to quickly recap what we talked about for episode 1 around asset management and some key discussions and findings that came out of that. Going to dig into detections in cybersecurity, just a general overview to get everyone on the same page. And then we're going to look at that specifically in OT environments and how certain things change and differ. Get into a bit of the weeds a bit, go through how it looks like in a live platform, again, like we did last time, and then look at the detection aspects in the regulatory landscape and what that means for keeping businesses operational and safe. So yes, we are now on episode 2 of the series. So it's all about threat detection. Once in the last webinar we talked a lot about getting, it's the first stage, getting you a complete visibility of all your assets and making sure that that's ready to start building on for the detection piece. So a quick recap of last session. That was all about asset management. So we talked about the different definitions of different OT assets. You got your traditional OT assets for industrial and manufacturing, the ones we're familiar with. There's the industrial Internet of Things, where you've got the sensors, sometimes in the outside world, relaying information to central control systems, and enterprise Internet of Things, where you've got physical system security, heating controls. And obviously this focus we were on in this series is mostly more about the traditional plant-based operational technology that keeps manufacturing, utilities, energy environments safe, keeps us all our well-being in place. We talked about the OT threat landscape. There was some kind of big numbers of changes there. So, 40% of cyber attacks in OT world caused operational disruption. According to SANS, NTSC was saying they saw 129% year-on-year increase in nation-state attacks. We're running some research. That research will come out shortly, and even the small sample size that we had in terms of what's the financial impact? Even every kind of small incident that was a true positive resulted typically in well over £1 million of cost. Obviously, in terms of what we saw in the media for the likes of January Land Rover, where they've kind of got hundreds of millions of pounds based on complete operational catastrophic disruption, is kind of varying much. But any kind of impact in this area or any disruption in this area has a big financial impact. Threat blind spots caused by a couple of things. One is obviously a big difference of cultural mindset between the IT team and the OT team. We'll discuss a bit more about that again today in the world of detections and how to handle the alerts generated by those, and how to, the visibility and monitoring that's, if you're not looking at all the different levels in the Purdue model, which we talked about, and we'll talk about again, you can miss signals of adversarial activity. How to overcome that? We'll look at passive monitoring techniques and building an intelligent asset detection capability and mapping and baselining around that. We looked at what that looked like in a platform, and then we dove into asset management requirements to maintain compliance with regulatory requirements and initiatives and directives, and obviously they're all becoming boardroom topics. Ian, I know you kind of probably watched it on repeat for quite a lot of times. Because it was great stuff. Did you have any thoughts from the initial webinar?
I think you covered most of it, Dom. I think the thing that kind of triggers me a little bit is this IT versus OT thing. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later on, but yeah, it's something I've got some views on, yeah, let's hold that. But yeah, I think the final point on regulatory and compliance directives as a boardroom topic, that is like super important, right? So yeah. And I think it's excuse me, I think that is sort of helping drive up the security posture of many OT systems. So yeah, that would be my takeaway from that.
Yeah, I mean, those the kind of differences, IT, OT, we see that across all the different topics, and in each of the webinar themes we've got, there's a kind of different angle to that. So in terms of detections, let's delve into that a little bit. What are detections in cybersecurity? What does it mean? So I'm just going to kind of use a general purpose mental model that we always talk about in cybersecurity for what are detections. There's detections, and then there's our kind of advanced detections, and we use this pyramid of pain model to describe them. And the good news around the pyramid of pain model is it's not about our pain; it's about how much pain we can inflict on an attacker. So there's questions we want to answer. How hard is it for attackers to avoid detections? We want them to kind of make it as difficult as it can be. Now, at the bottom of the pyramid, which are about hash values and file names and then IP addresses, if that's all you're using in a generic sense across the IT world, OT world, to detect signs of attacker activity, that's quite easy for attackers to kind of hide and spoof and bypass, because they're static values and they can kind of change them on demand, make them dynamic. When we get to domain names, it's still relatively straightforward, but as we get to network hosts, artifacts and tools, that makes it more difficult for attackers then to kind of change their MO, their kind of modus operandi, because if they have to reinvest in new tools, that kind of is a cost to them, which they don't want to bear. Then right at the top of that pyramid, we've got tools, techniques and procedures, or tactics, techniques and procedures rather. And that is, their behavioural patterns, their ways of working, it incorporates all the tool sets, the kind of different things that are likely to attack in a certain sector in a certain way. And if you got enough insights to be able to spot that across multiple vectors and correlate that together, that makes it really difficult, makes you a really tough target, and a tough target is what you want to be. In terms of helping customers traditionally in the traditional IT world understand where they are on that journey, we've kind of created a maturity model, and this kind of how it looks in the IT environment. We'll contrast that with the OT environment shortly, but just very quickly, what we did is we took that pyramid of pain, and those detection indicators as that first row. So you've got the same trivial to tough rankings for the different hash values, IP addresses, etc. But then we looked at, okay, in the entire in terms of the entire attack surface in the entire IT environment, how much of those areas have you got covered with the detection? So if you're just looking at device logs, or kind of you got endpoint protection basic level, that's relatively straightforward for an advanced attacker to bypass as well. When you start adding proper endpoint detection response with behavioral analytics on your user endpoints, your cloud endpoints, getting your cloud asset traffic coming in and correlating that with network traffic, and then kind of making up some really advanced analytics over the top of that, and you've got your entire attack surface covered with detections, then you're most likely to spot most things happening that are not within the normal realms of your kind of business process and operations. What you then do with that in the IT world, we talk about attack disruption, and it's very assertive there, because there's the impact of taking someone's laptop offline temporarily, isolating it off the network, temporarily disabling their user account. Generally doesn't have a massive financial business impact in an individual case. So if you see someone activating malware, or if there's a breakout in a certain network segment, and you kind of take that offline temporarily, clean things up and get it back online, the cost of that, if you catch it early, is relatively low. So you want to kind of get to the automated attack disruption, automated response area, based on known indicators, known patterns of bad behavior, keeping track of where your total environment is in terms of posture and maturity. There's various scoring mechanisms out there. Obviously, in the Microsoft suite, they have their secure score, which is a reasonably good benchmark. You want to be above 65%. And then testing those detections working. And this in the IT world is interesting, because that's the IT world is kind of what I call a volatile environment. You've got ephemeral assets that kind of grow and shrink and come and go and disappear on demand. You've got users that come and go and that change roles, and you get permissions creep. And so what you can get is detection drift and gaps. If you're not after 6 to 12 months, what you could detect when you're originally onboarded might change. So that's a level of kind of complexity and volatility that exists in the IT world. Ian, before I kind of give a contrasting view into the OT environment, have you got any thoughts on that?
So firstly, Dom, I like this the model that you've created here. I've been in threat modeling sessions where we go through and enumerate every single threat actor and every single thing that you could do, and you just end up with such a massive matrix of things. It's so hard to see the wood from the trees. So by boiling it up like this, I think is really good. The other thing I would say is that I mentioned at the start that I was an engineer. I still call myself an engineer. I started life as an engineer, and then I became an OT security person. And when I jumped over that fence, if you will, my going in position as an engineer was basically that anything that IT were doing was probably wrong. It sounds a bit mad, right? But your point about the laptop caught my eye, actually, because why did I think that what IT was doing was wrong? Well, as an engineer, I used to look after control systems, and if the control system had an issue, it had to be responded to in real time. Whereas if my laptop died, I'd call the help desk, and somebody in 4 days would come and fix it or something. So I always had this thing in my head. It's like, oh, IT just doesn't get it. The other thing I'd say is that if you go in any equipment room, certainly in my day at least, if you go to an OT equipment cabinet, it's kind of neat, and all the cables are all nicely dressed in, whatever. You go to an IT cabinet and you can't close the door because it's just a ton of spaghetti and there's no labels on anything. So from an engineer's perspective, I used to have this view that gosh, IT, you just don't get it at all. But what I learned and what you've illustrated here is actually IT do get it. We just take different approaches, and that's driven by business need, right? So
Sure.
the fact that my laptop was offline for 4 days, in terms of the business, is neither here nor there. Right? However, if I don't know, somebody in the trading company in the city, if their machine was offline during trading hours, that is a big deal, right? And so there's just different SLAs. So it took me a long time to have that epiphany that actually, you know what, maybe these IT people do know what they're doing, just have different business priorities. So anyway, it's a bit of a rat hole there, but I think it was a bit of an eye opener for me to kind of flip my mindset, saying, well, what can we in OT learn from the IT organization, as opposed to, oh, I just need to tell them because they're obviously wrong. So anyway.
Yeah, I think the interesting common denominator there is business context.
Yes.
Even in IT environment, obviously there's different. You need to understand for all the assets, what's the impact, and you can't do assertive attack disruption on everything. But you need to be able to group things into what's the impact of this if we do. So in terms of a contrasting view, into the OT environment, quite different. We created a maturity model in there as well. But this year it's got a kind of same type of idea, understanding where you are in terms of particularly maybe being a tough target or a slightly somewhat easier target, but the parameters and the kind of way we look at them slightly different. And that first row, Purdue coverage, we went to the Purdue model in a bit of depth in the first session. On the next slide, we'll go into it again with a different kind of lens on it. But obviously, the different levels that are kind of both in terms of the risk element and often kind of translated into a network topology from Purdue levels, kind of 0 up to 4 being the kind of IT environments. What coverage do you have in each of those in terms of being able to detect threats? What are the assets in there that are kind of critical that you need to be able to detect what's going on? And then we've got the detection technology, for each, is it just firewall logs you're pulling in the perimeters? Are you able to look at north-south traffic from doing PCAP analysis? Can you do east-west traffic? Do you have EDRs on the IT assets that are in that OT environment? And if you're kind of building on those things, what can you do if you've got good baselining and you can kind of spot from passive monitoring anomalies in traffic that throw things up? And then if you're kind of correlating all that across the IT, OT, external environments, and you've got good threat intelligence coming in, and you maybe got kind of some deception signals coming in as well, that you can do real kind of advanced tactics, techniques, procedures, spotting across different planes to give you a heads up that something's either in play or about to become in play. Now, response capability, we don't call it attack disruption in the OT world. It's more, it's a very different way of handling it. We use the Perdue model to talk about that on the next slide. But yeah, it's very much about how quickly the right people with the real deep business context knowledge can be notified that something is in play, for them to then instigate and activate the necessary incident response processes, procedures. In the advanced level, there's a kind of future-looking view that we can start to think about maybe doing some guided automation of isolating certain things. But again, business context and knowledge is really critical in that environment to be able to know well in advance what the impact is of disabling certain things. And then CAF4, I'll jump into kind of the cyber assessment framework and how that supports all of kind of getting your maturity levels up later down. But that's a view of you want to kind of get to fully achieve status for all the indicators of good practice as it pertains to IT and the OT environment. So before I jump onto the CERT report that's in the table at the bottom, Ian, did you have any thoughts on any of that?
Sorry, Dom, I feel like I'm blowing smoke here, but again, I really like this model because it just simplifies things. And the key thing you said there was business context. All OT systems are not created equally. On any particular facility that you go to, yes, you can map things on a Purdue model, but not all PLCs are equally important. Not all HMIs and SCADA systems are equally important. And I think there's a tendency for us in the OT security world to treat things as like, oh, it's a layer 2 thing, as if everything in that layer 2 is homogeneous and should all be connected together. So I think when we get on to the next part of the discussion, bearing that in mind as we go through. But again, I like this model. It just simplifies things, and it's accessible to people.
And has that been a challenge in terms of the right mental models? Does complexity exist in that OT environment as well? Is it kind of
it does to a degree, Dom. I think when I sort of reflect on sort of online discussions from OT cybersecurity professionals, we get terribly animated about the Purdue model. Oh, that's not a security architecture. Well, okay, but it's just a way to kind of visually or mentally sort of segment different parts of your systems. 62443 talks about zones and conduits, which I think if you take a zones and conduits model and sort of lay it on top of the Purdue model, I think that's real life. And I think but I think we get terribly animated about words. Honestly, the amount of discussions I've seen about define OT, it's beyond belief. And I'm I say that I sound like terribly superior, but I'm as guilty as as the next person. Many years ago, I attended a conference in the States where a fellow was standing talking, giving a presentation about SCADA security. SCADA, we call it SCADA. In America, they call it SCADA. So he was talking about SCADA security. And I thought, I don't think he means SCADA security. I think he means, a digital control system, distributed control system, a DCS. And I've sat there and I was horrified by this fellow's presentation, to the point where at the end of the presentation, there was a bunch of people queued up to ask this fellow questions. I joined the queue to tell this person he was wrong. Right. And anyway, I got to the front of the queue and I said, introduced myself, and I said, I just kind of intrigued. You talked about SCADA security, but you actually meant DCS security. And he said, yeah, I know. Oh, but why did you say SCADA then? He said, because the audience at that time, SCADA security was the term that we now have replaced by OT security. So I think in the OT world, we kind of get hung up on words and definitions. And that's why I'm kind of really pleased with this model, because it kind of takes a lot of that unnecessary conversations away and helps us focus on what's actually important.
Yeah, we try to obviously focus as much on outcomes as possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's I mean, in that table at the bottom about the Cert Polska report, I mean, that's a kind of working example. So if anyone's not familiar, there was an attack on the Polish Energy Authority at the end of last year from the Static Tundra, so they're a Russian-affiliated threat actor. But yeah, they got to level 1, 2 in the Purdue model. There was wind and solar farms impacted. I mean, they got in because for various reasons, there was no MFA on the VPN, there was default creds on the RTUs, the kind of remote terminal units, and there was no visibility. Well, there was no monitoring within the OT environment in any meaningful sense. So this is just to show, if they had level 4 maturity, kind of the MFA risk on the FortiGate VPN would have been flagged immediately, as would have use of default creds. The kind of east-west traffic and northwest traffic would spot OT anomalies, just in the kind of traffic patterns that this is outside the baseline. If you're all the way up at level 5, you might have got an earlier warning, the correlated tactics, techniques, procedures. Any traffic coming in that's kind of not using MFA, if things are implemented according to CAF, then it would be blocked. Firmware uploads, which was a part of the attack, would just not happen. And default creds attempts would be blocked as well. So this, these models, the kind of detections we have in place, the understanding of what gets picked up, it's kind of useful quite often to look at attacks that have happened, the incident reports, and kind of reverse engineer that onto, okay, if that happens to us, what do we pick up? What do we not? And there seems to be an increasing amount of material at the moment to do that from. In terms of the response capability, it's going to drill into that a little bit more. And we'll use the Purdue model to discuss around that. And Ian, this is an interesting conversation, I think, in terms of, again, another mindset difference between IT cyber and OT cyber, because in IT cyber, the teams, the analysts are running at 100%, 90 miles an hour all the time, even with all the kind of automation and intelligence and everything we've got to get rid of false positives and just surface, high value signal. There's still thousands of events, still can be still pushed through in a month in the enterprise zone. In the kind of Purdue 3, you might get tens of events, and in control area zones, you wouldn't expect, you'd expect maybe a few a month, from what I understand. But it's the percentage of what's how many of those are kind of critical severity. And if I understand correctly, Ian, sort of if things that get through into that control area zone, they're pretty much all high critical if they are true positives. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like we talked about earlier, if I get some malware on my laptop, kind of who cares, right? From a business outcomes perspective, that means Ian's a bit less productive for a day or two. Yeah, probably that helps the business. I don't know, but if we get some malware in, or attackers into that, the HMIs or the process control area, that really matters, right? That is, you're talking about safety, you're talking about production, you're talking about, financial and safety, potentially financial and safety consequences. So yes, I think that anything that happens at that layer needs to be investigated or responded to with the highest rate of response that you can muster, honestly.
Great stuff. Yeah, so it's yes, very you're correlating across these, having the different playbooks and the different kind of business context understanding.
Yes.
Yes, it's definitely a lot to take on board.
Back to your point earlier on about business context, right? You need to have the business context. But again, one of the things I was maybe trying to talk about earlier was we've shown, just for the simplicity of the slide, I'm sure, control area zones is like one thing, right? But they needn't necessarily be one thing. There might be multiple of these control zones, and they need not be all connected together. And that's why in IEC 62443, you talk about zones and conduits. So you might have multiples of these zones with specific conduits or connections to each other or up north-south. But again, I get it. This is just here to sort of simplify the picture. But again, the amount of events, that we should see in a reasonably controlled environment, at the top of your slide here, there should be a higher amount of events in your IT organization than there is in your OT, because we've put in a bunch of layers of control, right? So it sort of stands to reason that the number of events should be smaller. You made a point earlier on as well about the IT organization, the IT infrastructure being quite fluid, right? So like, how many laptops are in your company? Yeah. Whoever quite knows the answer to that question. And when was the last time, Ian's gone on holiday to Tenerife for a couple of weeks? So is his laptop part of the organization still, or what? So it's really hard to kind of keep track of things in the IT environments. In the OT, change is less frequent. It's not by design. It's not zero, but it's less frequent. So it's easier to see things that are anomalous in that, or it should be easier to see things that are anomalous in that OT environment.
Okay, yep, great stuff. So we kind of got our head around that. Let's have a look at some detections in bring this detection discussion a bit to life, and let's look at that in our platform. Collapse some of this down. So obviously, so those of you that were with us for webinar 1 will have seen obviously run through of the asset management functions of the Cumulo platform, and we're looking at unified IT/OT systems. So obviously we can see here that we've got the assets identified, looking at traffic flows between the Purdue models. We drove into a bit of that in terms of what's on the kind of appliance status, either physical or virtual, as to what it's pulling in from OT telemetry, and looking at the network traffic and the rules and passing logs from devices in there. But today we're going to talk about detections. So first of all, let's have a look at what are detection rules. So we're going to go in here. Those of you familiar with detection rules and doing cybersecurity threat detection engineering sort of recognize the imports it can do from the Sigma libraries, KQL from the Microsoft Sentinel environment. But yeah, so here we have a list of 50 rules. So if we want to create a new rule, we can do it statically. The kind of traditional way, give it what's it intended to do, what's the kind of threat it's against. And then kind of the different ways to kind of correlate across different signals, etc. But in terms of what a rule looks like, if you take a kind of click into one here, it's got a SCADA system integrity alert. Kind of it's looking for integrity check failure or unauthorized modification attempt, and it's looking this is the sources it'll pick those things up from. So let's just go back to rules. Oops. There we go. So we can also create rules from using similar different templates from the Sigma thing here, but this is just a kind of view of the different approaches you can get to creating the different rules that will kind of look at the different log sources and traffic to see what to surface those signals. In terms of the advanced TTP detections, if you look in here, you can kind of go in and see these. So can kind of drill into these. We've got critical one, and no malicious JA4 max. Kind of the logic there kind of is a rule that has a kind of definition of actions behind it, which if those actions are spotted, it will flag that into kind of the incident log for the analyst to look at. If we go into, let's have a look at some detected threats history. We've got some serious looking things here. Obviously, we've got Metasploit or Cobalt strike detected in your kind of your IT or your DMZ environment. That's pretty serious. So let's have a look at that. So that will show you the network connection that came in on, because it's looking at the network traffic. It's got that view. It recognized various fingerprint information and cert details, and can go into the evidence to see exactly kind of what it is that the fingerprints, the kind of the traffic patterns, which MITRE attack techniques that pertains to in terms of how level the threat is. Another interesting view for the OT side of thing is lateral movement, and I guess also vertical movement between Purdue models. You can kind of look at the different traffic going in, and what if that's beyond baseline, to kind of go in to see, okay, why is the traffic flagged? Could do some payload analysis on it. What's in there? obviously with the tools available today, you can kind of done some AI analysis on that traffic to say, what is it we think might be worth knowing about that kind of cross-layer traffic, and it'll give you kind of views of unusual register access, which obviously is something that would definitely want to look into. And that the system has flagged it. You can run the analysis on it. This is why these detections are key, and this is why having the assets, the visibility, and the rules on top to get those detections is what's really going to get you out of a potential sticky situation by getting early visibility of that and getting a full understanding of what's going on. Those will typically be flagged then in your escalated incidents, obviously for a working case. You can drill into what that means, why, give you some insights. Why is it a threat? Look at how that sits in terms of the cyber kill chain analysis. What's going on? How close are we to kind of being compromised? What's the attack path? How's it come in? What's the risk on those entities? There's obviously a lot we can kind of drill into in terms of get the detail, but it's all there to help the analysts and the business understand what can be tuned out in terms of is this true? What do we need to respond to quickly? And if we see these things, what are the kind of guided playbooks that you want to have in place? And if there's more context and information you want to give to it, you can kind of use the tools to train and tune the alerts and the detections to make them even more effective. Ian, you got any thoughts on that quick run through of how we kind of run that in the platform?
Sure. Yeah, I've got a few thoughts actually. You'd be unsurprised to hear. First thought is combined IT and OT SOC. Again, this is a thing that people talk about in OT security online forums a lot. I'm a big fan of a combined IT and OT SOC. And the reason for that is I think that having it combined gives the SOC the full field of view of the entire enterprise, and the enterprise being the IT and the OT combined. So they've got a full field of view rather than just partial view. So then they can respond more effectively, I believe. The other thing, again, I used to be an engineer. I didn't used to do this stuff. So I just thought a SOC was just a magic machine. Right? You just send the SOC stuff and they know what to do by the power of magic, right? But that's not true. So you were showing like the playbooks and things. So from an OT perspective, sending security events, sending logs and things like that from your environment to a SOC is great, but you need to work with the SOC to tell them what to do, to help them develop those playbooks, to tell them what to do when they detect events or specific patterns in the OT environment. And the responses, as we talked earlier, will be different, right? Ian's laptop gets infected, we'll just isolate Ian's laptop. No one cares. If something's happening further down in the OT environment, then that's a different response. We might not be able to just isolate that part of the environment. However, we might be able to say, guess what? We're getting a whole bunch of traffic knocking on our firewall door at one of our facilities. Maybe we should consider temporarily closing that firewall off so that the OT systems are protected or islanded until such times as we can resolve that issue. So I mentioned earlier on that I think from the OT, for OT engineers, I was in the place where IT are doing everything wrong, so we need to do something different. Where I got to through like many iterations and many epiphanies was, guess what? The IT security people do have some idea what they're doing, and we can learn from them. Not all IT security things can be directly transposed on OT, but a bunch of them can, and we shouldn't just dismiss IT security out of hand. We need to learn from them, and in the matter of the SOC, having a single SOC for enterprise IT and for your OT environments together, I think is more efficient and is more effective.
Great stuff. Yeah, I mean that seems to be a challenge that the industry's had worldwide, and obviously we're here for that. So yeah, great to hear that we're solving the right problems. Okay,
I think so.
Yeah. Great stuff. Okay, going to take a look now then at regulatory requirements and the implications with detections. Going to take a slightly different route to that than I did last time. Going to talk a bit, because obviously we kind of went through last time that the key raison d'etre for OT cybersecurity is more about availability and safety as opposed to IT, where it's kind of data protection. Going to talk a little bit around this kind of standard business continuity disaster recovery model, I'm sure we're all familiar with. And these things look at what's the maximum tolerable downtime of a business, what's the recovery time objective, recovery time point, and it starts at the top with understanding, what's the risk profile, what can we tolerate as a business, what are the policies and strategies we need to put in place to support that. Then in terms of actual processes, what do we do for risk management, business continuity plans, how do we test those? And then what are the assets, the kind of infrastructure and everything else underneath that's, we need to apply those policies and processes and rules to. So you can talk about business continuity and overall business and what's tolerable. You can also look at, when different assets and infrastructure at the bottom of the pyramid go, what's the impact then to that, and where do we need to have redundancy backups, where do we need to detect threats, etc. So I think a lot of people are quite familiar with. But in terms of how current and upcoming regulations and directives kind of pertain to that, obviously there's a few things happening. So if we look at the business continuity level, policies and strategies level, that's where I kind of align that to things like we're seeing with the Cybersecurity Resilience Bill, NIS2. They are kind of policies and strategies and guidelines, not necessarily tell you exactly how to do something, but it should tell you what you should be doing. And this obviously tools to help you enforce that. ISO 27001 in the UK is particularly, is a great one for business continuity, disaster recovery, keeping the business safe, having security management policies, etc. At the kind of more infrastructure level in OT, Ian's kind of mentioned a few times around conduits, etc. on the assets for IEC 62443. Before I move on to CAF, Ian, any thoughts around the kind of the policy side and those standards we've talked through so far?
Yeah, sorry, I'm smiling because when I started in OT security, none of these things existed. None of these regulations or frameworks existed. We had to make it up from scratch. So we did, right? And evolved over time. But it's amazing how little evolution was required from, I don't know, for 20 years in the matter of OT security. But what I would say on this is all of this is in service of the business. Right? And we as cybersecurity professionals sometimes get a little bit disappeared up our own, because cybersecurity or cyber is just the thing, right? But I think we always need to bear in mind is what is an OT system there in service of? What is an IT system there in service of? Well, it's in service of the business, right? If you're in a factory, it's making biscuits. You're making biscuits, right? Your OT system's there to help with the machinery. Your IT system's there to help with whatever the IT does, but it's all in service of the business. So, I think when we think about these, so things like risk management approaches, it's very tempting for us in the IT and the OT world to think, oh, we must make up a risk management process for our things, right? But I bet you in the biscuit making company, they've got a risk management process or risk management approaches. And I think what I've seen work well is when we use those established business processes and we plug in our IT or OT cybersecurity lens into that process, because the business is used to running these processes. And if we can use those processes rather than invent completely separate ones for just our IT and our OT, if we can use those, you kind of get a bit of a mechanical advantage because the business is already used to running these processes. So feed those things, feed cybersecurity in as just another initiating event. There's a lovely risk model called, or a way of visualizing risks called the risk bow tie. I don't know if you've seen it. Basically, it's called a bow tie because it looks like a bow tie. It's got a little knot in the middle and a kind of triangle either side. And on the left-hand side, it talks about threats and initiating events. And the thing in the middle is the risk, or is the event that you're trying to prevent. And on the right-hand side, it says, so if that event has happened, what are the consequences? And so many businesses already have that. And if you can feed your cybersecurity is kind of just like an initiating event. So in my biscuit factory, so the production line stops is our center of our bow tie. Now, what could cause the production line to stop? Well, a bunch of things, right? One of those things could be a cyber attack on your OT system. Just one. There's a whole bunch of other things that the business has already considered. So if you can build that in to the business process, it just makes your job of getting buy-in from your board or from operations or whomever, it just makes it easier to talk in that language. Whatever language your company uses to talk about risk, use that language to talk about cybersecurity risk rather than some esoteric stuff that we in the cybersecurity world think is useful.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of unified IT OT SOC, I mean, I would definitely see that as a mitigation to a identified risk in your risk management process. So we've got this risk that, if these assets are attacked, it can bring the whole business to a halt, and the financial impacts of that is X amount of day.
Yeah.
And how do we bring that kind of probability of that happening and the single loss expectancy around that right down, where we have a really kind of efficient and effective security operations center service that can spot things across those. But getting that in place can be a challenge for some businesses. So obviously the NCSC are on with the cyber assessment framework, which is rather than being it gets more into the how, not exactly, but it's got really good indicators of good practice. Don't know if you can see it there, but obviously guidance C and principles C1 and C2 are around security monitoring and security event discovery, and they very much align to that risk management, business continuity, validation testing. Those all map quite well onto a mature threat detection and response capability in terms of understanding the assets and the risks against them, what you need to detect, how you need to respond, how you make sure that's working continually throughout, and not kind of getting any drift and slipping away. Just to dig into that CAF a little bit as a final bit. So CAF Objective C has two key principles. One is security monitoring, C1, and C2 is threat hunting. For security monitoring, and this applies across the board, obviously you need to make sure you identify what are the sources and tools for logging and monitoring and kind of alerting that you need to have. Obviously, we've kind of walked through that in the Cumulo platform in terms of how it identifies everything you've got across the different Purdue models, and making sure that you're kind of getting the information you need to triage those effectively. The easier you can make it for your personnel with effective automation, effective use of the latest large language models, artificial intelligence tools, brings down the learning curve and the kind of the cost and the time to kind of deal with those. And obviously understanding user systems behavior, that's a fundamental principle of effective threat detection and response across any environments. And that brings the slideware to a close. Emma, did you want to bring in the Q&A? Is there things anyone kind of put any questions in?
Yes, we have. Firstly, thank you very much both. I'm sure everybody would agree that was a very interesting session. So thank you very much for the insights there. We've had a couple of questions come through. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we had some questions come through a questionnaire form prior to the webinar. But firstly, we'll jump straight in. The first question we had come throughout the session was, does the network detection and response system tell how many events have happened at different levels? And my assumption here is that we're referring to the Cumulo platform that you walked through, Dom. So I'll pass that question over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely can continue. It categorizes across the different Purdue levels in terms of how many events, what level of traffic we've seen, how much traffic, how many logs have gone into the system based on Purdue level. And that's quite, it's quite different from what we do in the IT world, where things are much, we know log sources are coming in, but there isn't a different, not necessarily such a focus on levels of infrastructure risk where we need to kind of understand the events. Whereas in that OT world, the different kind of especially for areas 3210, understanding the differences of event activity, what's outside the normal, how many logs are generated in each area, is another way of spotting if things are changing. If there's suddenly a ramp up in log activity, that's another way of spotting that something outside of the baseline is happening.
Is it fair to say, though, Dom, in the IT world, not everything's created equally as well, right? So there'll be some servers in your IT world that contain more sensitive information than others. They might be, if you're like a trading company in the city, the machines that the traders are using are more important than Ian's laptop. Yeah. So I think that's kind of matches a little bit to the OT environment.
Yeah, I mean we've referred to that. Everyone talks about the crown jewels. So
yes,
you kind of what is the target objective in a TTP model for the attacker? What's their impacts and objectives? In that trading environment, it'd be the servers that are doing the trades. In a telecoms environment, it might be the OSS BSS servers that are controlling everyone's communications. And it's starting there. How do you minimize making sure that nothing gets there that's not supposed to be there, that's not authorized, and it's kind of very much a ring of defense. It's the layered defense in depth around that crown jewels. But because each industry, each customers can kind of wildly vary of how they have deployed their assets. A standard model like the Purdue model doesn't necessarily apply as to the level of specificity. It's much more of a conceptual crown jewels, defense in depth, spot as much as you can coming in from the outside before it gets anywhere near the inside perimeter.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Thanks.
Great. Thank you both. And then another question we've had come through, Ian, be interested to get your standpoint on this with your history of expertise in the field. From a regulatory standpoint, what evidence of effective detection, in quotation, do auditors actually expect to see in OT environments?
I did see that one come through. Interesting question. I'm not very good at short answers, so I'll give you a long one. I think for many of these regulations, they are a little bit vague, maybe. I know vague's the right word. Let me give it a metaphor. When NIS was being produced, I remember talking to some government people about what should be in it. They had an advisory board. So I remember being part of that. And I expected the government to say, you need to do A, B, C, and D. And they didn't. And none of these regulations say like really specifically what to do. They say you should have a risk management framework, and it should have these components. But I think I was quite surprised because I said this is a bit like you've imposed a limit of instead of telling me the maximum speed I can drive on a motorway is 70 miles an hour. What you're saying is you need to drive judiciously on a motorway, and you have to decide what your speed limit is in the motorway. And we'll come along and audit you to make sure that your decision-making processes are correct for your setting of the speed limit and that you're following that. So I thought it was a bit weird, honestly, but I guess when you flip it around the other way, if you imagine you're in government and you're trying to tell all of these industries what to do, it's impossible, right? Because in government, you can't know the details of what every single industry does. So I think there's also some sort of correlations with the safety industry. Because in safety, there's an approach which is called the LARP, A-L-A-R-P, as low as reasonably practical. So you can make any system really safe by switching everything off, but then you can't produce anything. So you have to make sure your system's as low as reasonably practical. And when the government or when health and safety come and audit you, they're looking at your processes and your procedures and your decision-making process. So anyway, back to the question: what are they looking for? I can't speak for others, but my experience is they're looking to see that you have gone through a process to decide what it is you're going to be monitoring. You've gone through a decision-making process to come to that conclusion, and that you're executing on that. So, not the clearest answer, but I think that's just where it is.
That's great, thank you. And Dom, do you have anything to add there in terms of, I guess, as we would say, from a defender's standpoint and building out detections?
I guess a good guiding principle is the indicators of good practice from the CAF 4.0. I mean, the detail that quite well. So in terms of what the auditors would want to see, if you can match that, you're definitely in the right ballpark, the right detection. If I was the auditor, I'd probably be looking a lot deeper. But yeah, if people are on that journey, making sure that you're clear which log sources and why, how secure they are, what rules you're building on top of that, how often you test them, running attack simulations, all those kind of things at some level of reasonable frequency.
Perfect, great, thank you very much. And we will squeeze in one last one because we appreciate this one came in prior to the session, so we don't want to leave it out. But this question is, what's the safest way to detect east to west traffic anomalies in OT without disruption of control systems? I'll throw that open to both of you. Anyone wants to go first?
Shall I have a go first, Dom? Is that all right? Yeah. So I'd say first thing is, do you need an east-west connection? I was rambling on earlier about, we often talk about the Purdue model as if everything's just this big sort of homogeneous blob at level 1, at level 2, level 3. So I'd say, do you need to have process area 1 connected to process area 2 connected to process area 3? Oftentimes you don't. Right? So that's thing one. Do you need to have east-west connections at all? And if you do, I think there are sort of different approaches. You can get protocol level firewalls if you need to sort of insert a firewall between process area 1 and process area 2. My approach would still be passive monitoring. I know there are some folks who are advocating more active monitoring at that level. I see where that's going. I think that in time we'll get to the point where we can do more active monitoring in the OT space, but well, initially passive monitoring would be my steer. Dom, I don't know if that chimes with you.
My completely unbiased view on that would be to deploy a Cumulo critical infrastructure appliance on a network span to do that passive monitoring.
There you go.
And to do the PCAP analysis using our AI and our custom LLM models to surface threats in that east-west traffic.
A very unbiased opinion.
Thank you very much both. On that note, because we are over time now, we will leave this session here today. Thank you very much for everybody who has joined us. Thank you, Dom. Thank you, Ian. The recording will be sent to everybody who's attended post the session. If there are any colleagues that you think would be interested, please share this with them. And we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time for episode 3. Thank you so much for your time. We'll see you very shortly. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.